First, I've said repeatedly that this stuff cannot be taken away from people. It is their favorite toy, and it will remain so as Freud said in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys. Don't bring the toys to my house. Don't say my children must play with these toys. Don't say my toys might be a condom. Here we go again. Are not allowed by their toys. I'm not going to have any of that. Enough with clerical and religious bullying and intimidation. Is that finally clear? Have I got that across? Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I welcome you on this Valentine's Day. I had to make some adjustments. Welcome, happy Valentine's Day. Hope this stream is going to be for all the lovers out there. I've had a week in Christian apologetics that I want to share with you, specifically surrounding Jonathan McClatchy, Eric Manning, and their apologetics. They each have a channel that relies heavily on the McGrews, which, to me, these are bankrupt apologetic individuals and entities. The apologetics themselves are bankrupt, in my opinion. So I want to go over a whole bunch of things, but before I do that, I just want to, Morning Nitty, I just want to do a disclaimer. Much like when you can go over to your certified public accountant and maybe even law office and make yourself a S Corp, a limited liability company, I want to separate the individuals that I'm about to talk about as the persons I'm about to refer to. I'm referring to their business. I am not referring to anything personal about Jonathan McClatchy specifically and Eric Manning specifically, but their business, their blogs, their Discord, their apologetic doubt pages, and Testify. Not a personal attack here. I am going heavy at them, but I just want to make it clear it is towards the business of apologetics that they provide. In one of the clips that I'm going to pull video from, you could see Eric Manning's kid lovingly come on to interrupt the stream with her dad, and it's a cute thing. I am not attacking that dad. I'm only attacking the blog poster, the YouTube content maker, the apologetics behind Jonathan McClatchy's doubt narrative. So that being said, I'm going to claim they are bankrupt. I am not claiming they are bankrupt. I'm claiming their S Corp, their limited liability. That part of them is bankrupt. All right. I just want to say that in the forefront. So what brings this up? I am a member of Jonathan McClatchy's Discord on Talk About Doubts. And my first interaction, I saw him on like either Unbelievable or some sort of debate that was very similar to Unbelievable. And, about a year and a half ago, signed up for his Talk About Doubts website. I very much fit in the category of I want to believe, but I am firmly in the atheist camp as a not believer. And wanted to hear from me. They let me in. Somebody contacted me. This gentleman contacted me, and he sounded exactly like a clip that I'm going to show you from Doug earlier this week. I'm sorry, last Thursday. So let me give you that clip here. Or at least I thought I had it queued up. Here we go.
Okay, so you agree he doesn't need us, and you agree that he could have chosen not to create, right? I.e., that he has free will.
Well, he could have, but the fact is that he did choose to create us.
Okay, but see, this is the issue. If you care about truth, which I think both of us do, then you don't assume that your God is real from the get-go. If we're talking about arguments for God, you ask the question: maybe this God exists, maybe he doesn't. Now let's look at the evidence. If the evidence is that this God, this particular God who sees the future does not like sin, like let's say through the holy text it says, I hate sin, I don't like sin, I don't want sin. He would not create a world that he knew would lead to sin. If he doesn't want, do you believe God wants anyone to perish, Paul, in hell?
Well, I believe God has allowed evil and sin to occur because it allows us then to see the full attributes of God. Because if there was no evil, then...
But if we didn't exist, it wouldn't matter.
God, but we do exist.
That's I know, but you're working backwards. You're saying we exist, therefore X. I'm saying let's start with
let me explain
and work forward.
Right. Let's talk you're all evidence-based with truth, and so am I. Now, I want to just explain on the evidence how I know and why I know God has to be real, because
I know you want to go into theology, design. I'm sure that's where you want to go, but I want to talk about the problem.
I'm trying to go into I'm trying to go into the fact of why there's a creator. I mean, that's the basis.
Why is there a creator?
Well, because there's evidence to show that he's real, in the sense that we can see things that he's created with the earth and the universe, for instance. I can see those two things right now.
Okay.
Now, just like my house.
This is the design argument. I'm very familiar with it.
Okay, so even if you throw science at it, you'd have to agree that, the common laws of science have to apply to these arguments, in the sense that, cause and effect is probably one of the most common fundamental laws in all fields of science.
But let me ask you this.
And so,
about the design argument, you were talking about the house, and the house has a designer.
All right, so it goes into a house and a designer. Doug's going to summarize pretty nicely. Hi, Melody. Summarize pretty nicely that the aspects of a bad designer of a house, and it goes on for a little while. But I want to cut to a little bit further when he asks him a couple of more questions, and this is where the person that contacted me from Talk About Doubts sounds exactly like.
Well, again, it's a display of his might and his power to show us how great and grand he is by creating this thing. I mean, he's done the creation as a reflection of himself,
so
just like you would do.
96% dark energy, dark matter is a display of his glory.
Everything out there in the universe that we see is. I mean, we are as well. Cancer? I mean, we've been created in his image. Sorry?
Is cancer a display of his glory and majesty?
Well, I mean, everything is controlled and ordained by God, right? He allows these things to occur.
Is rape and murder a display of his majesty and glory?
Again, like, it's not, God didn't introduce the sin. Mankind rebelled against God, bringing sin into the world. Okay, God allows it to happen because it gives us a display of his full attributes. Because if it didn't exist, like I was saying before, if it didn't exist, then we wouldn't understand the full attributes of who God really is.
Paul, I do not see a distinction between allowing and causing with an omnipotent, omniscient being.
Okay, well, that's where you have to come to understand God and who he is, and you're not going to understand or know who he is unless you really...
Every person who goes to hell because God caused it.
Not at all.
Yes.
They're the ones that have chosen to rebel against God. It's the sins of that person.
Who created them with free will?
Well, God did.
Did God know they would
we have
rebel?
Free will. But, of course, God knew everything. God knows how the
world's going to end. Could God have chosen not to have those people created?
Of course, but then, I mean, why wouldn't he just make moist robots where nobody sinned? I mean, where's the fun in
why
that?
Maybe this God didn't need to make anything.
Right, he didn't, but he did, though.
Okay,
so we can't argue.
Of years,
I'm going to skip ahead to this point here. So basically establish that this is what's truth, and this is the point of view of why you have to believe in a creator. Now let's skip to my favorite part. This is my favorite
who
part.
hates sin, who sent his son to die on a cross. That to me is all foolishness, which you would agree with. The gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing. So you would say, yeah, Doug, I can understand why you think that's foolishness.
Oh, I wouldn't say it's foolishness at all. I mean, we know there's eyewitness accounts of Jesus Christ, who was a real person, and any professor in any history professor in any university across the world right now would say that Jesus Christ was.
Besides Paul.
I'm just saying that. Well, name me one eyewitness account that saw the Titanic.
Now, I can answer that. There are millions of Americans right now driving an automobile called Dodge. If the Titanic wasn't witnessed to, there'd be no such thing as Dodge because they all came across on the Titanic and were rescued. Little known fact, fun fact. Look up the manifesto. There's about 5 Dodges on there that survived. The Titanic was witnessed to. They survived, and they went on to do great things and documented their survival. It's very simple. It's a bad argument. Strictly bad argument. And it's an even worse argument to say that there's witnesses. And Doug's going to pull this out of him. Now, keep in mind, this is the foundation. There is a foundation of Christianity in which you have to accept the witnesses. You have to accept it. And it's about to be debunked. And I'm going to fast forward again a couple more times through a couple more clips, but here's the thing. When you put your foundation in Jesus and you display that evidence, just like my Talk About Doubts type of counselor, I guess you could say, representative, when that gent displays this type of confidence as the foundation for Christianity, and it gets debunked this easily, but then you resort and retreat to the foundation of Jesus Christ's faith, you've actually debunked your own reasons for being a Christian. It's time to double down. The whole point of this conversation is going to be badmouth doubts and talk about doubts and testify in their ability to say doubts and call them as deceivers. They are intentionally, testify and talk about doubts, are intentionally deceiving. And I'm using this as an example on how they are doing it as well.
I mean, we can have this argument about, but we can have this argument about what's happened in history and whether it's true or not. But I mean, if I'm not going to believe in anything that anyone says in any history book, then I'm not going to believe in anything in history if it occurred at all.
Paul, can you give me an eyewitness account for Jesus' resurrection and post-mortem appearances?
Alive today? No, I can't.
No, even dead.
Well, all the apostles.
All the apostles. All the apostles.
One.
Mark. John,
Mary,
all the others that were there on the day. I mean, I could look up the names if I have to look the names up. But.
I hear the phrase eyewitness account. This is what I think of. You tell me if this is reasonable. An eyewitness account is when someone says what they personally saw. Do you agree with that? Okay. If you agree with that an eyewitness account is someone saying what they personally saw, sort of like, Doug, my name's Doug, saw this. Can you, besides the Apostle Paul, can you name anybody who says that in the New Testament? Chapter and verse, please.
Well, we know that, the writings of John, that for the apostles, they had to be an eyewitness to the resurrection. And this was recorded, and granted, it wasn't done.
It was recorded and granted. So this is Apologia short on his criteria for what it would mean.
Anyone qualifies for the description of eyewitness defending martyrdom. That the person in...
Oh, that's the wrong clip. You try to do the right thing. I'm going to go back to this and I'll find the right one.
I'm not saying they were sincerely indoctrinated. I'm saying they're sincere about seeing Jesus alive after his death.
And yet, Mike can't point anywhere to a phrase like, I, Peter, saw Jesus alive.
The only thing I could...
I'm not saying they were... sincerely indoctrinated. I'm saying they're sincere about seeing Jesus alive after his death.
And yet, Mike can't point anywhere to a phrase like, I, Peter, saw Jesus alive, or I, James, saw my brother Jesus alive. If we want to believe that these men saw Jesus alive, we have to take the word of anonymous authors, decades later, and thousands of miles away. We need to grant sweeping generous interpretations and inference, rather than point to clear, unambiguous reporting. It's the difference between caring about whether an idea is merely plausible, or whether an idea is actually testable, true, and affirmed.
I'm not.
But you agree with me that it's not in the text.
Right, but neither is the word Trinity.
Okay. So
Great point. Neither is the word Trinity. You know why Trinity isn't in there? Because Johannine Works didn't offer the Trinity in the actual book until nearly 700 to 800 years after the fact. It was added. It was added in. That's why Trinity doesn't appear there. It was a concept post hoc. It was added. So this is the foundation of the evidence that people believe in eyewitnesses. And they spout as if it's, and you'll see him continue to go back to the witnesses. And my issue with this is there's no witnesses. There are zero. There are exactly 0 witnesses. 0. But it's the go-to. And it was one of the first things that was gone to by the representative for Talk About Doubts. And to me, this is the foundation of the bankruptcy of the apologetics of Jonathan McClatchy. Yep, we sure can. Thanks, Nitty. So, yes, we could just go to the bottom of the ocean. We found this like back in 1980 something, early 90, if I remember correctly. I saw a documentary on how they found it. They sent down a submarine. They figured it would be difficult to find the ship itself, but they could probably find the debris field. And once they found the scatter of the debris field, they would just follow it to its conclusion. And that's how they found it. 85-ish. Thanks, Melody. Yeah. They basically had some equipment that could find the debris field, and then they sent down something that found the actual ship. And I think they had they found a couple of ships before they found the Titanic. So, Melody, happy Valentine's Day, by the way. All right, let's go back to, let's see. I'm going to play 20 more seconds of this clip here.
when I asked you for an eyewitness account other than Paul, because I'll give you that, Paul says, I, Paul, saw the resurrection. He appeared to me. But that was after Jesus apparently ascended into heaven, by the way. Can you think of anybody else in the New Testament who makes the claim, the eyewitness claim, that they saw the resurrected Jesus?
To the extent of the answer you're after, I can't answer that question.
You can't answer that question. You can. The answer is no. There is no one else.
There is no one else.
But we're looking too far deeply into the incidentals instead of understanding the fundamentals.
See, just pay attention to the incidentals. Let's pay attention to the incidentals. All right, I'm going to come back to this clip. I've got a couple more that I want to show you, but I want to go to Jonathan McClatchy talking about the incidentals. This is Jonathan McClatchy talking with Apologia, whether the resurrection is fact or fiction. This is a clip from Apologia's channel that he edited. There's a full debate, I believe, on Jonathan McClatchy's channel that I put in the description here.
In Mark 16, I think it's implied that there were appearances. It says, so the angel says to them, verse 6, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And so a lot of skeptics get hung up on this verse. It says they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment to see them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
Right, but Jonathan, like, that's the trouble. I don't know, you're talking about an inference. The text doesn't actually say it, right? And so for someone like myself, it's well, the text doesn't actually say it. Yes, if you bring in what your preconceived idea of the story is,
then sure, it doesn't contradict. Let me just finish and then we can converse because I didn't finish responding to the point. It says, say nothing to anyone for they're afraid. Now, what's Mark's normal usage of that expression? So
Mark's normal usage. Mark's normal usage. What's Mark's normal usage? For example,
he says, what does he say to the leper in verse 44? See that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest. So in other words, say nothing to anyone on the way to going to present yourself to the priest. Now, Mark, as we have it, is broken off at Mark 16, verse 8. And we can only really conjecture as I have it ended originally. The most plausible reading, I would argue, of the phrase, said nothing to anyone, is that the women did not run screaming into Jerusalem until all what they'd seen to the verse mailed at the men. Rather, they ran straight to the disciples without telling anyone else. In fact, if you look at Mark's usage elsewhere, Mark 5:37, for example, Jesus allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John. Mark 9, verse 8, suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them, but Jesus only. Mark 10, verse 18, Jesus said to him, why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone. So I think it's quite plausible to understand it in that way. Sure.
Okay. So we're relying heavily on Mark for these incidentals. Now, why is that? Because Mark is our first gospel, and it's the first time that we hear from disciples. It's not Paul's writing. It's not mysterious of whoever wrote Paul. It is Mark. Now, here's my problem with Mark as a doubter, is when you hear an apologist like our friend over at iPub, Bill at iPub, he wants you to believe that it is a firm foundation Mark came from Mark. How do we know Mark came from Mark? Well, we have Papias, that's somewhere around 130, Common Era. Somewhere around there, Papias wrote some information. And in that information, we've lost that to history. But we have Clement commissioned Eusebius in the late 4th century, somewhere around 370 to 380. Eusebius documented that these are the things that were said by Papias. So we have that information, but it's not actually very flattering to the good source that Papias should be. In fact, it's a crappy source, and he's kind of called a couple of names, and it's not very complimentary, in my opinion. It's very weak sauce. Weak sauce as can be. Now, the first time that we have a documenting that Mark came from Mark is from a guy named Irenaeus, which is approximately 50 years after Papias would have said it. 50 to 60 years after Papias. But the problem is in between there's two problems. The first one is in between there, Justin Martyr, who's the heretic hunter, he does not mention Mark as Mark. He just refers to the Gospels generically as the memoirs. You can almost put it in quotes as like a passé. But he does mention that Mark is the companion of Peter or the translator of Peter. Fast forward back to Irenaeus. One of the problems with Irenaeus is Irenaeus' source may be Papias. Now, how did Papias know this stuff? Because he wasn't around when it would have been written. He was told, according to him, by John the Elder. And it's kind of vague. To me, it's a weak sauce source. I'll put it this way. If I want to know something is a good source, in the Bible, in the Holy Bible, I would expect Jesus to have written himself with the clarity and the gravitas you would expect to have from somebody who was human and God at the same time, with the ability to be born of a virgin, perform miracles, die, and resurrect. If he's capable of doing all those things, seems like he wouldn't have to rely on Paul. Seems like he wouldn't have to rely on Mark. He wouldn't have to rely on Peter. Now, there could be, quote unquote, memoirs that come along the way of, hey, it was great to spend some time with this Jesus fella. Man, it was great to have, to be a disciple of this guy. But we really don't see that. Mark is the companion of Peter. Peter is the apocalyptic preacher. And in my opinion, he memorized a trope. He performed that trope almost as a play or some form of entertainment, the equivalency of television in the first century. He practiced it, he entertained, he maybe even got some converts, and hopefully he earned a living by doing so. Maybe even paid his translator. Right? Now performing, Peter, and his translator, Mark. Peter's gone, Mark lives on. This is what Peter used to say. All right? That's how I picture it. Now, with Jesus not having written it, Bill, our friend at iPub, wants to claim that Plato also didn't write his information down, his philosophies down. Now, what Plato said and did, and his students kind of continued the evolution of, really is not of my concern. It's evident that they did in the spirit of Plato, and they kind of went their own directions, much like evolution schematics show. However, Plato didn't die, come back, and have the ability to finish his business. Jesus did. Plato started his institution. Paul started Jesus' institution. Peter started Jesus' institution. And neither one of them like each other when it really comes down to it. They're kind of at odds. They're not on the same page. This is supposed to be for the Jews. This is supposed to be as a relief from these Roman invaders to our Jewish way of life. And guess what? It's failing. It's failing miserably. Let's make up a story so it's not failing as miserable. Oh, while we're at it, why don't we just go ahead and let the Gentiles in and not have to circumcise them? Agree to disagree. Jesus had an opportunity to rise on the third day, have his book in hand. God already wrote it for him. It was a plan. Remember? And pass it around for the next 40 days until his ascension. Plato did not have that luxury. I want you to think about how incompetent Jesus is in this scenario, comparing it to Plato. And I also want you to look at the contrast or juxtaposition between Jesus has his words documented directly, has God's plan fulfilled and passing it out. It's even protected by miracle today. Versus, let's appear to Paul in a couple of years. Peter's just going to kind of hem-haw around and kind of go to just a base of stories that requires Mark to eventually, 35 to 40 years later, finally jot down onto pen to paper. And in the meantime, the Gentiles are now in because Paul's ministry was so successful as a probably good, solid monetary foundation for Mark and whoever wrote the memoirs, the quote, Justin Martyr's reference to memoirs. We don't need animal sacrifices anymore. We don't need to throw things to the priests anymore. We have this Roman coin we can use instead. So let's rewrite it so the Sanhedrin doesn't have all that power with the welfare system that they have been making a centerpiece to their power. And that, to me, is what's going on. Now, when you juxtaposition those two, which one looks like deception can get in? Wholesale deception. Is Paul a deceiver? Is Peter a deceiver? Is Mark a deceiver? Is any one of them capable of being absolved in a court of law against being a deceiver? And I say to you, no. Those three entities are bankrupt when you try to prove there wasn't deception between the three of them. It is impossible. especially compared to I could pick up my holy text right here, and Jesus just so happened to perform a miracle on that book. It's still generating verses today by miracle. Just like the seedling can become a tree. Just like a soybean can turn into a soybean plant. The Bible seed just grows. You plant it, and it grows you a new book. And it even has an update every once in a while. And adds to it, because it's a miracle from God. Just like the trees. You know, look at the trees.
Trouble for me is that I don't think that Mark is an eyewitness report of any kind, and that, you know, that we're talking about something that was written 40 years after the event.
By the way, I kind
report of any kind, and that
I kind of like the uncomfortable yet chomping at the bit with the foundation that Dr. Max Baker Hitch believes he has.
That we're talking about something that was written 40 years after the events, and that it is basically a writing down of 40 years of growing legend.
So I would dispute your claim, first of all, that it was written 40 years after the event. I would say much earlier, but be that as
okay, let's call it
much earlier. How much earlier? Like 5 years? When did Peter exist? When did Mark get written? It's believed to be somewhere between 68 and 72.
30 or 20.
Okay, it's immaterial to this subject. I don't think it matters terribly much. I don't think the evidence for any conclusion is conclusive. But that what you say that Mark is, you don't believe Mark's an eyewitness candidate, sure, but that's immaterial to the alleged point, because the point that was being made was that Mark has no resurrection appearances. And I said that based upon the way that Mark usually uses that expression, it's and also the implication in Mark 16 that there were, because the angels tell the woman to go and tell the disciples that Jesus will be meeting with them, that suggests that there were in fact resurrection appearances, even though the ending of Mark has been broken off and we have to check it.
But I think what we can fairly say, though, is that even if we grant that, so that you can read the text very carefully and with all the context, and then infer that there were appearances in it, that they are of lesser quality than the appearances in the later books, that there is a progression of that these are inferred appearances in Mark, and by the time you get to the apocryphal Gospels, we're having these massive data sets. And there's an inconsistency, though, because you conceded that 1 Corinthians 15 is an earlier source, and 1 Corinthians 15 has an appearance to 500. So, but this is why I was trying to ask earlier. You're granting that people believed this. Like, a creed to me isn't a source. A creed is telling me what people at that time believed. Like, Paul didn't make up the creed.
Right, so you want to jump in there?
Well,
So basically, Paul's going to be interrupted here, but I just want to show that you can look at the video between Kevin and I, Kevlar, where we discuss 1 Corinthians 15 and how thin of a foundation it really is. There is nothing there. There are 0 witnesses actually in the creed. In my opinion, there are 0 witnesses. There are brethren who might be witnessing, in my opinion, and they believe something, but they didn't witness a resurrected Jesus. In the Greek, it's ambiguous to assume that there are 500 witnesses. I don't believe that's true at all. I believe that there are approximately 500 who have joined the church, and there's a hierarchy of James, the brother of Jesus, Paul, Peter, and some of the apostles. That's it. And I don't think they actually believe that Jesus was a resurrected human being in the flesh. When you look at all of 1 Corinthians 15. And since there's 0 witnesses, the state is such in the New Testament, I don't believe you have a solid foundation to stand on unless you use faith. That's your only way to stand on a foundation. And faith is the exemption of evidence where it should be, and instead assume that it's going to be there. Yeah. Thank you, Nitty. Do I want to Yeah, let's listen to
I feel
him.
like it would be helpful if we almost kind of agreed on, or managed to get clear on what it is that we agree on. So, I mean, I assume we take it for granted Jesus was crucified. I also get the impression from you two that the burial and empty tomb are very much not things that you two grant. So it could make sense for us to discuss that. And the thing I'm not quite clear on at the present point is to what degree the both of you think that the disciples sincerely thought, whether they were right or wrong, and obviously you think they were wrong, but that they sincerely thought that they saw Jesus alive again, which is obviously, that's the thing that is, often called a minimal fact, in the sense that even an atheist scholar like Gerd Ludemann will say it's historically certain that Peter and the 12 thought that. So do you guys grant that they thought that Jesus appeared to them?
I'm going to jump in, sorry, because my view is a little bit unique on this, although I'm finding more and more people are agreeing with me. I accept that Peter and Paul both believe their stories. I don't think we have evidence for any individual other than Peter and Paul who believe their stories. So I accept that those two were relaying something they actually believed.
So what about the 12?
I see do we have any records of anyone, any of the 12, saying, my name is Bartholomew, I saw Jesus risen. My name is Matthew, I saw Jesus written. My name is any of them. I don't think the 12 basically disappear from history. And I'm not even sure the names of the various lists of the apostles don't even match, although I know that's harmonized, so I should bring it up.
So, I mean,
But no, I don't.
Okay, so I mean, I think that you would agree that's a minority position. Like,
No, the trouble is people say disciples, people say apostles, but then when I press them on what they mean, they come down to, well, I guess we have evidence for these two, but we like to use this broad name of the 12. We like to use the broad name of the disciples.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's extremely implausible. I mean, and I think mainstream scholars, including atheists and agnostics, generally do think that it wasn't just Peter and Paul. I mean, for one thing, so given the extreme earliness of the 1 Corinthians 15 summary, which I think you both grant, I mean, we could quibble about exactly how early, but pretty early. The 12 were a group who existed. I think that much should be uncontroversial. And so for Paul to be passing on this creed to the Corinthians at a time that they could quite happily go up to Jerusalem and talk to these people, to posit that this...
And by the way, in the Greek, there is not a reference to you can go talk to them today. That's only in the English. It doesn't exist. Now, I want to admit that my house of cards on 1 Corinthians 15 all falls apart if there is a clarification that there were more than 500. If the way it reads in the Greek, to my understanding, is it's referencing above. And you have to get a clarification on which definition of above means. If it means in the heavens, above, because a good portion, about 10% of 1 Corinthians 15 in the verses in the 40s to 50, there is description of earth and heaven, and it goes back and forth on comparing the two. Jesus is of heaven, heavenly stuff. Adam is of earth, earthly stuff. And it goes back and forth, and it's descripting that. If you take that information and you take the definition of death and the reference to die, you then have a conflict on if it means there were about 550 that appeared, that saw an appearance, or it means 500 believe above them. And to me, they are called brethren. They're not called witnesses. They're called brethren. Which means if there's 500 who are out there knocking on doors and converting people to their religion based on Jesus is going to come any minute, just like I remember the Jehovah's Witnesses clamoring away in 1975, bringing in loads of converts. When you look at how many that they had convert in the 3 years leading up to October 24th, 1975, and what it dwindled over the next 10 years, you see a huge contrast of the ability to give the power of suggestion on something that they believed. None of them had witnessed anything. They're just called Jehovah's Witnesses. None of them witnessed a thing, but they're witnessing. And to me, that is a scenario that played out somewhere during Paul's time. He'd recruited. He had, in my opinion, a perfect Christian multi-level marketing scheme. So there's no witnesses, period. Zero. Absolutely zero.
Claimed appearance of the 12 is just sort of fictional, I think is quite implausible.
Well,
I'm not necessarily saying that there were 12 fictional characters here. I am saying, at least for me, I don't know, I forget what Paul G is about to say here, but the 12 are in the hierarchy of this multi-level marketing scheme, one way or another. Whether they witnessed something, whether they, were a part of this apocalyptic preacher crew and support staff for the apocalyptic preachers, that I believe. But superhuman entities called Jesus, or whatever the human name for Jesus was, is very real. But the supernatural part is very fake.
That's unfortunately we're coming down to what's plausible or not. Like we don't have, even in Galatians, he doesn't list that he went to visit all the 12. In Galatians, he visited Cephas, right?
Sure, he visited Cephas, who was the spokesman for the 12.
Right.
Well, I mean, are you saying the 12 didn't exist? I mean,
the 12 existed. I think the 12 probably existed, and they scattered to history after the crucifixion, because that's really the reliable sources we have don't give us any hint of any of the other beyond Peter
and James, right? James.
Well, James the brother, or James?
James the brother of Jesus. I mean, he's
but he wasn't one of the 12, right?
Well, but he was a witness to the resurrection, so I don't see what relevance it has to your point.
Well, but was he?
Well, so 1 Corinthians 15 specifically mentions that Jesus.
I understand 1 Corinthians, but then I would grab the 500 as well, and I don't.
And we know that Paul was personally acquainted with James because he meets with him in Galatians 1.
And do we, in any of those, does James affirm?
In 1 Corinthians 15, that's what Paul represents James's belief as being.
Okay, this is this weird creed that it's like, well, if I met Humpty Dumpty, would I say Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, all the horses and all these men couldn't come together again? Or when I relay Humpty Dumpty's story? Galatians, Paul says, and I'm sorry, I'm really monopolizing time and I will be quiet soon. He talks about these men added nothing to my message, which for someone like, you can read it as, oh, we all agreed. But in the very next section, we know they had a very big disagreement. So Paul may well be saying, I didn't listen to anything these guys said. Like, I guess for me, the creed is part of the legend. And it doesn't matter if it happened only 2 years before. I don't think the 500 saw Jesus. I don't think the 12 saw Jesus.
I mean, sorry,
perfect.
Paul, did you want to?
So that's a perfect explanation. You don't have James the Just, in his writings, say, it was great to grow up with my brother, who was mostly God and only partially my brother. There's zero interest in James the Just bragging about how great it was to just get to spend another afternoon with his brother after he thought he'd lost him. Like, if it was really true, it seems like it'd be obvious that it would be there. So making an argument, I guess I'm making an argument here that it's of absence, but I mean, seriously, it's 40 something, whatever year James the Just is writing this, and there's no reference to how great it was to be with his brother. In my opinion, he talks about Abraham and he talks about Job more than he talks about Jesus. And that is the eyewitness account we have. That's it. End of list. There was a perfect opportunity. Perfect opportunity. Missed. Completely missed.
I didn't want to cut you off.
No. I feel like I've spoken a lot, so I'm going to sit quiet for a minute.
Well, I mean, in terms of the 500, I'll just say something briefly, and then I don't know if Jonathan or Harry want to come in. But in terms of the 500, I mean, Paul is quite explicitly saying some of them are still alive. I mean, what?
Yeah, that's not true. I don't believe that's true. In the Greek, that is not true. Some of them, basically, there's a conflict that these people were told, hey, we're going to see Jesus return before we die. And some of them are dying, and they're actually complaining. They're complaining to Paul in this communication that Paul is stating, hey, not all of you have died. Some of you, not all of you have fallen asleep. Some of you are still living. And if you lose your faith now, this will all be for nothing. Is exactly the way it's said. I don't believe he's saying it the way he's saying it. It's a slight difference. It's basically saying the same thing, but it's kind of saying it kind of like when you're assuming the conclusion. If you're assuming the conclusion, then what Dr. Max Baker Hitch just said sounds accurate. If you're proving the conclusion, it's people are complaining to Paul that Jesus hasn't come back yet, and they're starting to die off. And Paul's got to address it. Yeah, I know, but if you lose your faith now, it's all for nothing.
So if he thinks that this is totally fictional, then what on earth is going on there? Paul's saying, Paul in that, in 1 Corinthians 15 verse 7, it says 500 brothers and sisters at once, some of who are still alive, some have died. This is the 50s AD in Corinth. The Corinthians.
Well, some people put that as part of the original creed.
Well, I don't think it really matters actually whether it's Paul's. It's Paul.
Right.
I think we all agree that it's coming from Paul, and Paul knows people in Jerusalem, and he's saying to the Corinthians quite explicitly, "You can go and talk to some of these."
Yeah. And how would that work though? Like, I've never been able to figure this out.
I disagree with Apologia here. Like, I don't think it's saying that you can go talk to him today. You can talk to these witnesses who aren't witnesses to anything that Jesus did. They're witnessing that Jesus is going to come back almost immediately in our lifetimes. Don't even have kids, family. Don't even buy your next meal. Jesus is, he's already late because some of us have died.
How would that work? So you don't live anywhere near Jerusalem. There are 500 people in Jerusalem 20 years ago who said they saw a thing. Well, go check it out.
Well, Jews went up to Passover to Jerusalem. Male Jews were supposed to try to go up to Jerusalem for Passover if they could.
Yeah, and so you go to Jerusalem and you start asking around which of the 500. And we're supposed to suppose also that even if they found someone like that people wouldn't make up. Oh yeah, like for example, the Woodstock concert. There are hundreds of thousands of people who said they were there, even though there's only a few thousand people who were there. As a studied thing. How are this whole? He couldn't, if he said, go check my work, means that the work is fine. That's not the way this stuff happens. The fact that you can say that my work can be checked doesn't mean that the work was checked or could reasonably be checked.
Yeah. All right, let me go back. I want to show two more things on.
So you're not based on his feelings, and one of the first things you brought up was eyewitness accounts. You just admitted to me that you don't have more than one. You have one eyewitness account where someone says what they personally saw in the first person. One. Most religions start with one, maybe two people. Your religion's no different.
Like I said, if I want to get into the incidentals and work out every person that was there on the day of resurrection, I could go and do the research if I wanted to, but I don't need to, because I already accept the fact that it happened and that it was real.
Why? Why do you accept it? So, is it possible to you that there's a God existing, but Christianity is false?
Well, there's a lot of religions out there that claim that their religion is correct.
Right.
But I understand there can only be one true God, one almighty God, because if there were two, then who's the real almighty God? There'd be a battle.
Do you remember my question?
And so,
is it possible that a God exists, a creator God exists, and yet Christianity is false?
I don't believe that to be true based on the evidence that's been presented that I accept.
Because when I asked you, how do you know that this is true? You said, well, by the designer of the house. You're appealing to a creator God. And you know what? I'm going to give it to you right now. You have it. But that does not mean Christianity is true.
But based on the eyewitness accounts of Jesus Christ,
which you just admitted you have none except for Paul.
Sacrifice.
You have none except for Paul. I want to go back to the witnesses. There's witnesses everywhere. Except there are none. So deciding whether something is doubtful or on a firm foundation. And Doug has systematically removed every single thing of Paul here's foundation. There's nothing there. Doesn't exist. I'm going to skip ahead here.
What exists and Christianity is false?
Well, let's go back to what I said before, that to qualify as an apostle, they had to be an eyewitness to the accounts of Jesus Christ.
There it is again. Witnesses everywhere. Like, what's wrong with Jesus coming down? And we have witnesses like Oprah gave away cars back in 2006, I think it was. Like, it baffles my mind how terrible of a foundation the Christian has. But yet, they reflect on it. They're bastions for all these witnesses. Falsely.
As an apostle.
Right.
But how do you know they saw the resurrected Jesus?
I don't. I just have to trust that they did.
Why do you trust?
Because I believe in creation. I believe there has to be a creator.
Right, and I gave you that.
Jesus Christ died on the cross for my sins.
Okay, but do you just presuppose it that Jesus Christ died for your sins?
Well, based on the evidence with the multiple eyewitness accounts and the historic.
And look at, there it is again. The eyewitnesses are everywhere. Oprah is alive and well with Paul. You get an eyewitness. You get an eyewitness. You get an eyewitness. But Jimmy Tux, he gets a set of linens. You get the 800 count sheets. Linen sheets. Oh, that's nice. Thanks. Thanks, Tux, for playing. I don't get the witnesses. But apparently everybody else does.
Facts that he was real.
You're repeating yourself, but when you say based on the multiple eyewitness accounts, yet admit that you don't have any multiple eyewitness accounts, you're contradicting yourself.
But why would they record these events where it got them killed?
Yeah. So it goes into the martyr claim, and there's no such thing. There's no such thing as good martyrs. You know, it's Peter. And that's about it. I mean, basically, of the 12, I think he's the only one. Maybe, I mean, to me, James is a political hit. To me, there's one apostle and two non-apostles. So yeah, Tap Dats, exactly. Nitty nails it. And I get a shroud. I get a shroud. V.S. Lewis, you're so funny. Yes, I get the 800 count. I get the 800 count fake Jesus from the 12th or 13th century. No problem. No problem. Who would have thunk it? All right. I'm going to get to the meat potatoes. This is the banner on Testify's page. That's the banner. It says the disciples were either, (1) deceived, and that's etched out. 2 deceivers, and that's etched out. 3 telling the truth, and that's underlined in bright fuchsia. Bright fuchsia. I'm going to take my shroud and go home. This is ridiculous. So, let's explore a little bit, since I've basically talk about doubts a little bit, because that's exactly what they say. That's what they all say. So I want to play this clip from Non-Alchemist. Love Non-Alchemist. He can summarize in 3 minutes what it takes me 45 minutes to an hour to say. I don't know how he does it. He's amazing. He's amazeballs.
If there is just one chance in a million that this is true, it's worth believing. Far from raising the bar or the epistemic standard that Christianity must meet to be believed, I lower it. If there's any evidence that it's true, then it's worth believing it. You, anxious Christian dude. Yeah, you.
Yeah. Here's Here's our friend Testify, Eric Manning. Doug plays this clip
the guy with the
quite
doubts.
often.
Stop listening to atheist YouTubers. Turn off rationality rules, turn off Holy Kool-Aid, turn off genetically modified skeptic, and turn off Matt Dillahunty. Listen, I know you want to mitigate against your biases by listening to the other side. I know that sounds like a wise thing to do, but you're actually being stupid.
So there you go. There's a good summary of Eric from Testify. Now, one of the issues that I have is this is Eric Manning's blog. And this is the explanation that covers all facts. A miracle occurred. All right. So I want to read you this clip right here. Aside from the claims of miracles, the argument here assumes that the Gospels and Acts are historically reliable and rooted in eyewitness testimony. In other words, we trust them as much as any ordinary document of secular history. Now, where have I heard this complaint before? All these witnesses, all of them. So let's go back to this pretty little picture right here. The disciples were either deceived, deceivers telling the truth. Which one? With all these witnesses that aren't actually there, there's zero foundation for these witnesses. My question to you is, at what point do you take the claims that Mark wrote Mark, and you consolidate that down to its ultimate conclusion and say, yeah, Mark is not reliable as the author of Mark. He's relaying at best what Peter said, which means Mark himself is not an eyewitness. And at worst, somebody wrote it. Somebody said it was Mark. Mark was supposedly with Peter, and somebody just made it up. There's no witness, one way or another, of who wrote Mark. We don't have a witness. We have Papias, who's tainted goods. We don't have anybody who says defiantly and brings the receipts, Mark was written by Mark. We don't have anybody who who's able to affirm that Paul wrote all of his letters. So let's say Paul writes and there's somebody fakes Paul and says, let's say the Timothy's, Titus, 2 Thessalonians, Colossians, and Ephesians. Let's say they're not. And Dan McClellan just had it out with Eric from Testify. I don't want to play that clip because I'm going a little long, but let's just say biblical scholar brought the receipts and Eric Manning is going on faith. It's basically Christopher Hitchens' claim, you can't take this away from the Christian. This is their toy. They believe in it. They believe in it on faith. They're not going to admit they're wrong. They're going to keep clamoring away about how great their witnesses are. And when you pin them down to provide the receipts for those witnesses, there is none. Time and time again. And that's where you need to double down on doubt. And I'll tell you why. There's a song by Bruce Springsteen called Brilliant Disguise. And it's basically the chorus is when Bruce is looking into the eyes of this woman he just met or this wife to be. He's trying to figure out if he's falling in love with a real person or if it's a brilliant disguise. And the reason I'm asking you today to double down on doubt is because Paul looks like a brilliant disguise. Whether he wrote his documents or not, Paul is just a vision. Mark didn't witness anything. He's just repeating a memorized portion of what Peter said. So when I stare into the books about Jesus and I'm asked to fall in love, and I sit in the Sunday pew and I'm told a nice sermon about how Jesus has fallen in love with me, and all I have to do is be in love with him, and all will be better for the rest of my life. The hook is that you need to be greedy for that eternal life, all that treasure, all that promised reward. Your sacrifice. You're going to be punished if you do this, but it'll all be worth it in the end. Is it you, Jesus? Or just a brilliant disguise? Is it you, Paul? Or just a brilliant disguise? Is it you, Mark? Papias? Is it you, Justin Martyr? Is it you, Irenaeus? Is it you, Eusebius? Or just a brilliant disguise? I think Non-Alchemist is going to answer this question for us in a mocking way. And once again, he can do in 3 minutes what it takes me 45 minutes to say.
Here's an apologist giving advice to doubting Christians.
Hey, you, anxious Christian dude. Yeah, you, the guy with the doubts. Stop listening to atheist YouTubers.
It's time to stop!
Turn off rationality rules, turn off holy Kool-Aid, turn off genetically modified skeptic, and turn off Matt Dillahunty.
What's behind this advice is clearly the concern that people are falling away from the faith. But what's the logic to it? Well, the issue, according to Eric, is that too many Christians listen to opposing viewpoints without fully understanding Christian evidences.
One common mistake I see from Christians struggling with their faith is that they try and prematurely flex their apologetic muscles by spending time listening to tons of atheist YouTubers, but they don't get the bulk of Christian evidences strong under their belt first.
Until they can give a robust case for Christianity, it's foolish for people to listen to the other side to try to mitigate their biases.
Listen, I know you want to mitigate against your biases by listening to the other side. I know that sounds like a wise thing to do, but you're actually being stupid.
I don't think this is a straw man, but a pretty fair summary of what was said in the video. And Eric anticipates an obvious objection.
At this point, I'm sure skeptics will laugh and say that I'm just circling the wagons and telling you to indoctrinate yourself first.
Rather than framing this in terms of indoctrination, I think it's better to ask the question, does this approach model intellectual virtue? If you're a Christian watching this, would you be okay with someone from another religion doing this? It seems that Eric says he would, but would you? Think about it. Imagine that you have a Muslim friend who is committed but hasn't thought too deeply into it. You finally share whatever your version of the gospel is with them and sketch out some reasons to think that Christianity is true. They seem interested and even seem to be expressing doubts about Islam as they've been watching channels like Mike Winger's or Testify. But, they say, they don't want to continue talking about it, and they've committed to stop watching those channels so that they can study Islam more. Would you be okay with that? Do you think that this is what someone sincerely seeking the truth should do? It's highly questionable whether it is, or whether the hypothetical person is really being objective at all. Philosopher Michael...
So, there's your great summary of everything that I'm trying to say. The difference is you're seeing a progression. I want to show you the progression of how reliable, how reliant the Christian apologetic is on witnesses. I mean, it is their whole thing. And I'm telling you, there's zero there. They have nothing. It's their toy. They believe it on faith. And the only way to take it from them is to call them out for the receipts on these witnesses, because they don't exist. They just plain don't exist. And when the liberal scholar, the person who spent 10,000 hours on it, is just easily dismissed by the Christian faithful as they're gay, they just want to sleep with their co-eds. Their cup size is pretty nice, so you know, they just get hired to spread the word in the media. The well poisoning from the individuals who are really doing the work and really starting to come out and say, yeah, you're not telling the truth. And everything that you're doing as an apologist is a brilliant disguise.
Like mine. If you're just now entering this apologetics, counter-apologetic space, then find some channels you like who argue for different positions and watch them all. Simple. But if doubts scare you and your local church is too inept to handle it, then head on over to talkaboutdoubts.com. Oh, geez, Rick, I've been really struggling lately. I just keep having these doubts, and there's no one to talk to. Oh, man, Morty, that's horrible. But I have the solution, Morty. Talkaboutdoubts.com. Talkaboutdoubts.com. That's right, Morty. Go to talkaboutdoubts.com. That's right. Talk about your doubts. Talkaboutdoubts.com. Oh, gee, you're saying I go to talkaboutdoubts.com? Yes, Morty. That's what I said. Look at all these people you can talk to, Morty. Don't you want to talk to this guy, Morty? I have too much fun with this sometimes, honestly. And hey, if you like to laugh, I have more comedy and satire in this playlist next to me.
Yeah. I absolutely enjoy Non-Alchemist. What a great summarization. It's just perfect. So I want to go back to my friend Doug's channel and his conclusion with Paul. And once again, he goes back to the witnesses. Oh, shoot. I just realized I was showing the wrong screen.
Evidence that's been presented for me to believe it to be so.
You believe it because the Bible says so.
If I believe in God, I'm not going to. He's not going to give us a law that says don't lie. Ninth commandment, don't lie, and then turn around and lie to us. I mean,
right.
I'm not going to.
But where did he say that
God
there's
says,
a hell in the Bible? Yes.
Well, there's multiple times in the New Testament where hell is mentioned.
Yes, yeah. So you believe that hell exists because of the New Testament,
right? But what's that got to do with anything? So I'm not
what if the New Testament's wrong?
What if it's not?
So you're saying there's too much at stake?
Not at all. I'm just saying. I mean, you can have those arguments. Occam's razor or whatever it is. If I'm wrong, then nothing to worry about. But if I'm right, then
no, Paul. That's where you're wrong. You know why? There is a God. I know I told you I'm an atheist, but there is a God. This God is so smart that it's said to me in personal revelation that he does not like the religions of the world, including Christianity. So he told me through personal revelation that only atheists go to heaven and everybody else goes to eternal conscious torment, including you, Paul. And I do not for the life of me understand why you're risking all that you have. Life.
So Doug's about to do a pretty clever little out of context clip, but before that, I want to show you him and Haw.
Atheists go to heaven, and everybody else goes to eternal conscious torment, including you, Paul. And I do not for the life of me understand why you're risking all that you have. Life is but a vapor here on planet Earth. You're risking it all for being a Christian. Do you realize how silly this is?
I'm going to leave you there, Doug, mate. All the best. But if you believe that atheists go to heaven and that God doesn't like Christianity, then a Christian is a person who follows Christ. Now, if he doesn't like us because we're following his son, then you don't understand the real God.
But he isn't the son. This is the point.
Yeah, he's not the son.
Enjoy your day, man, and all the best.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul. Take
Retreat. So on multiple occasions, I've seen Doug. The last one was when he was on another stream and he did the flying man to Jonathan McClatchy. Talk about doubts. You're bankrupt. You rely heavily on these witnesses. You rely heavily on the martyrdom, and they don't exist. They just plain don't exist. I'm sorry. And it looks like a brilliant disguise. That looks like what you're following. But I do want to close. I want to close with the clever clip.
You're risking it all for being a
on
Christian.
Doug's channel. The way he incorporated
how silly this is.
Because he starts to stutter stammer, and then Doug does a little clip from obviously some sort of after show.
And I think I'm nearly going to start up a little rap song that says, stick to the script, stick to the script.
Yeah. Stick to the script. Stick to the script. The script is full of witnesses that don't exist. It's fake. Your martyrdom claims, they don't exist. It's fake. Your claim that Mark came from Mark doesn't exist. It's fake. Paul didn't write all of Paul, and even if Paul did write Paul, all of it, it doesn't exist. The information that's contained in there is story, and it's manufactured by witnesses that didn't exist. None of them. There's no foundation. The only way to accept this is to believe it on faith. And faith is where you take doubt and you stuff it into a compression sack and you toss it away. And if you've been deceived, if this brilliant disguise is ever present, you'll stand before whoever you stand before at the end of your life, and you'll find out you've probably been deceived by a brilliant disguise from the first century. There's only one way to take the toy away, and that is you have to go and investigate this for yourself. It's not easy, but sometimes you grow up and you don't need your toys. You just don't need them anymore. You find something better. Protect yourself against the knowledge of good and evil. And I believe that knowledge of good and evil is full of deceivers and deceived. And the minute that you rely on witnesses that don't really exist, you yourself testify, you yourself are the one that's deceived. So I leave you again with Christopher Hitchens.
Remains so, as Freud said, in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys. Don't bring the toys to my house. Don't say my children must play with these toys. Don't say my toys might be a condom. Here we go again. Are not allowed by their toys. I'm not going to have any of that. Enough with clerical and religious bullying and intimidation. Is that finally clear? Have I got that across? Thank you.